On April 12, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. sat inside of a Birmingham jail cell. His crime? Protesting the city's unwillingness to adhere to the Supreme Court desegregation order. More specifically, King and other protesters defied a circuit court injunction that banned any forms of demonstrations, parading, or picketing in the city. Though nearly a decade since Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision, Birmingham, like the rest of the South, remained obstinate and non-compliant. Local activists had struck deals in good faith with local businesses to integrate the labor force in the city services. Those in power, however, remained insidious and perfidious. City leaders kept pulling the levers of deny, disavow, delay, and deflect. Those who upheld the injustice and illegality of racial segregation would deny and disavow having any animus toward people of color whatsoever, while simultaneously delaying and deflecting any attempts to change the city's culture of structural inequality. So after months of delays, Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference decided to act. By engaging in a nonviolent demonstration, they would expose the acute violence that encumbered the existence of blacks in Birmingham. And thanks to the presence of television cameras, the world was about to witness what blacks in Birmingham already knew to be true. So-called public safety officials maintained a theater of terror for African Americans in the city. Upholders of law and order would deploy any and all forms of violence to defend an unjust status quo. But resistance didn't just come in the form of ardent segregationists. As King sat in jail on that April day, an associate smuggled in that day's newspaper, and in it, 8 local religious leaders published an open letter entitled A Call for Unity. These were well-respected moderates with the ear of both the white and black communities. And in this open letter, they bemoaned King's nonviolent demonstrations as unwise and untimely. They labeled King an outsider and accused him of inciting hatred and violence. And the letter even concludes by praising law enforcement in Birmingham for protecting our city from violence. And on the margins of that newspaper, without a library, a dictionary, or even much light, Martin Luther King wrote a letter in response, a letter that is now arguably among the most morally clear and consistent Christian epistles ever penned, and one of the greatest articulations of American democracy, a letter from a Birmingham jail. In it, King challenges each point. To the point of him being an outsider, he affirms the interrelatedness of all communities and states. No citizen of this country should sit unconcerned about the suffering of somebody else somewhere else. For injustice anywhere, King writes, is a threat to justice everywhere. To the point of protests being unwise and untimely, King uses history as an example. Freedom is never given voluntarily by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Nor does justice ever roll in on a wheel of inevitability. Inaction is neither prudent nor neutral. To not act, to not speak out, is to stand on the side of injustice. And to those who accuse King of inciting violence, King made clear the aim of direct action. It exposes the inherent violence that's already baked into a system of racial injustice and inequality. To suggest that those who protest violence are the ones who incite violence is like saying the person who carries money incites a robbery. It's a flawed logic that puts the onus of responsibility on the most vulnerable. It's a displaced sentiment that puts the blame on the backs of victims. Many like to cite King today. Many like to evoke his name to denounce protests, call for calm, and reaffirm law and order. Yet by doing so, we've incorporated King's identity into the same talking points once used to denounce and defame him. But we can learn an instructive lesson from King's letter today. We have a choice where we can stand when cultures of injustice and inequality have such long and deep histories as they do in this nation. One cannot turn a blind eye or remain silent. Silence is concession. For instance, it's not enough to say, I am not racist. It's not enough to say, I am not sexist. In a nation built upon racial and gender hierarchies like America, we're either racist or we're anti-racist. We're either sexist or we're anti-sexist. Either we actively work each and every day to upend and flatten the curve on systems, structures, and daily behaviors that reinforce inequality, or we are part of the community spread. There's no in between. As King wrote to his critics that day, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Many of us like to think where we would have stood during this nation's dark night of slavery. We would have stood with the abolitionists, not with the slaveholders or those who just took slavery for granted. Many of us like to think what we would have done to advance the cause of women's suffrage and civil rights. I would have been with King, not somewhere drunk with those intoxicated by apathy. Well, today, we have a choice. How many more instances of unmitigated, insidious disregard for Black life must we witness at the hands of those called to protect and serve? How many more 12-year-old boys must be gunned down by police officers for playing in the park with a toy gun like Tamir Rice? How many more teenage boys must be shot dead by so-called neighborhood watchmen like Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery? How many more women must be shot in their own homes as unfortunate cases of mistaken identity like Atiana Jefferson in Fort Worth or Breonna Taylor in Louisville? And how many more times must we watch another man have the life choked out of him as he pleads, I can't breathe, like Eric Garner and George Floyd? Either we are part of the problem or we're part of the solution. We must choose this day who we shall serve.